A new year, a new beginning. Even though we may have done some wrongs in the past, a new year is a time to change ourselves for the better. And I know Capcom with Street Fighter 6 has been dropping the ball lately, but I'm sure that'll all change. Hey look, they dropped a new update video. Let's see what everyone is saying. Okay, so many people are not too happy with how Capcom has handled the post-launch content for Street Fighter 6, giving us small balance changes that virtually did nothing to change the competitive environment, no meaningful content like character costumes, and of course, have dreadfully long wait periods for DLC characters coming out. Some might say that this is probably the worst Capcom has handled a fighting game product and traded the FGC. However, this got me thinking, is that true? Of all the times Capcom has taken L's throughout the years making fighting games and working with the FGC, is Capcom's handling of Street Fighter 6 the worst? Well, let's explore that. And all the times Capcom has taken L's for their poor decision makings with fighting games and with the FGC. So in this video, I want to look back at some of the controversies, big or small, that Capcom had with their fighting games, starting from Street Fighter 4 and on, and rank them on how bad they were. Now, a disclaimer here is that I know they made some whack stuff like Capcom Fighting Evolution back in the day, but I specifically wanted to look closer from the 2009s and on when Capcom started to work more closely with the FGC. Come along, and let's look back at some of the bad decisions Capcom has made that gained the ire of the FGC and the gaming populace. Street Fighter Cross Tekken was certainly a game. Now, I'm sure that there's a community of players out there who absolutely love Cross Tekken, and they have every right to do so. But we also have to remember the context that this game originally released in and the many problems that it had. To name a few, there were the terrible character teaser trailers that had these ripped up collage sort of aesthetics, revealing characters that we already were used to like Dhalsim or Abel. They also had the weird DLC characters like Cole from Infamous and Bad Box Art Mega Man. I'm sure that some people really do enjoy them, but you know, especially when they're adding kind of like random DLC characters that don't really belong, like Cole from Infamous, it was kind of off-putting. They also had the terrible gem system where it kind of added some variance to the game. On top of that, they had DLC and pre-order bonus gems, which may have not really been that game warping, but it was certainly a headache for tournament organizers to basically have standard legal setups if they wanted to have Street Fighter Cross Tekken tournaments. But nothing could prepare us for the biggest controversy out of the Street Fighter Cross Tekken release, which was on-disc DLC. So Capcom basically released the game and they already had all the DLC characters on the disc, and you basically had to pay to unlock all the DLC. Typically you would have DLC released after a game is created, but having it already pre-baked in really didn't sit well with everyone. And you know, this was kind of like the height of people kind of getting tired or starting to get tired of pre-order bonuses or these constant DLCs releasing after major games launches. With the on-disc DLC debacle, it pretty much soured any goodwill toward Street Fighter Cross Tekken from the general populace, and the game pretty much sort of fizzled out after the first 2 years. It's a shame too, because this was a new crossover game with the most iconic franchises in Street Fighter and Tekken. This could have been a new series giant like Capcom vs SNK or Marvel vs Capcom. Instead, it just became another weird anomaly in a list of crossover fighting games released thus far. But at least there are people who are appreciating the game despite all of its controversial beginnings. So for me, the ranking for Street Fighter Cross Tekken's launch would be in the wow, that's pretty bad. And the reason being is that this could have been a new franchise crossover where we would have been already on the second Street Fighter Cross Tekken game, but unfortunately, Capcom bungled it at the start and essentially it died within the first 2 years. But hey, speaking of controversial business decisions, how about controversial balance decisions? Because let's talk about our next controversy. It's no secret that Deejay is not a great character in Street Fighter 4, so being the undisputed low tier ever since his release in Super, Capcom decided to give him some much needed buffs at launch Ultra Street Fighter 4. He got buffs like his far standing medium punch having less startup, his air knee attack is more plus on hit, and his EX machine gun upper is now throw invincible. And man, after those buffs, Deejay became top 5 in the game, showing up in every top 8 at every Capcom Pro Tour event, and thus cementing as one of the biggest winners of Ultra Street Fighter 4. Okay, enough lying. So, the buffs did absolutely nothing for my boy. He still remained bottom 5 in the game, and everyone points and laughs at him along with Dalsum, Hakan, and Dan, but it wasn't the less than nothing buffs that Deejay got, it was more so that Capcom decided to nerf Deejay for some reason. Yeah, I'm not sure why, but despite Deejay being one of the worst characters in the game, Capcom decided to nerf some aspects of Deejay's toolkit because, you know, these buffs might make him too strong. So what did they nerf? Pretty much the only redeeming quality that Deejay has, which is his light Sobot kick. So they did a buff and a nerf with the light Sobot kick. They buffed it in that it went from -5 to -3 on block, so it makes it a lot harder for people to punish it. But in exchange, they removed the low invulnerability it had. And like, that was the whole point, that was the whole good thing about his light Sobot kick. The reason why you would throw it out there was so that you would be able to blow up someone's low forward if they decided to respond to you back. On top of that, the buff that light Sobot kick got, where it was -3 on block, so it's less punishable, Deejay players were already spacing it out so that it would be hard for the opponent to punish it anyway. So the entire buff really didn't even matter to their game plan. When the balance patch video came out for Deejay, everyone was not happy. I think collectively the FGC knew Deejay is hot trash, and Capcom not only decided to nerf Deejay, but the most important and redeeming quality of Deejay. Also, what sucked is that Combo Fiend took strays from the community because he was essentially being the messenger for Capcom's poor balance decisions. But at least this will be the only time Combo Fiend will ever receive flack for being the messenger for Capcom.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which suggestions or warnings about...
Eventually, Capcom rolled back this change in future balance patches of Ultra Street Fighter 4, but man, was this a questionable balance decision from Capcom. So with the terrible Deejay balance patch on this tier list here, I would probably have to rank it as, it's not that bad. I mean, yes, it sucked at the time for Deejay Mange, but eventually they reversed the changes. I mean, yeah, it still sucks that Deejay went from bottom 5 to bottom 5, but what are you gonna do? Well, we have to discuss this. It is inevitable. Whenever we talk about the history of Street Fighter, this time period will always be a major chapter in Capcom's dark ages. So let's talk about launch Street Fighter V. Okay, so people have already talked about this again and again and again, so I'm just going to talk about it relatively briefly here. Street Fighter V on release was terrible. Not only did it have virtually no content, the online was bad, but it also released with 8 frames of input delay. At this point in time, Street Fighter looked as bad as it could get. Capcom miraculously was able to bring the franchise back from the dead in 2009, and now shortly after in 2016, they practically managed to bury it up to its neck. Street Fighter V eventually got good, but it took so many years for that to happen. And it took a lot of work for Capcom to undo the damage that it did when they released Street Fighter V. To put it bluntly, I would just have to rank launch Street Fighter V in its own tier. Like, there is nothing that will be able to top just how bad Capcom handled the launch of Street Fighter V. Now, we also have to talk about that around this time, Capcom was also dabbling into the esports environment, and we're trying to integrate the FGC into the esports culture. And because of that, Capcom made some choices that were trying to change the FGC to be more environmentally friendly for the esports investors, which leads to Capcom having one of the more funnier controversies. So some of you may be curious, what is Thuggery, and how does this involve Capcom and fighting games? Well, in 2016, Capcom released their rules and player guidelines for the 2016 Pro Tour season. Much of it was the usual standard fare that you would expect from previous years, but there was some additional rules added for this year. The first new rule was not allowing adult-oriented content companies to sponsor players. So to explain, around 2013, top US Street Fighter player Long Island Joe was in the talks of being sponsored by Brazzers of all things. On top of that, you also had Filipino Man and Valmaster also being in the talks and or already being sponsored by you or Team YP for short. However, Capcom probably seeing that the potentiality of L.I. Joe walking up on stage at EVO, being televised on major networks like ESPN, and having the Brazzers logo plastered on his chest probably was not something Capcom was not willing to risk. However, it was the second rule that sparked some outrage/laughs from the community. Capcom banned gambling at any of their events and followed this up with, and I quote, "The company has taken a stance against swearing, violence, and other forms of thuggery." This sparked some outrage, as this was at least the first time to me where the grassroots community was clashing with the chic and clean vibe of esports. So like, the violence part I think is pretty understandable. Like, you should stick to doing Dragunov's wall running 2 in the match of Tekken rather than doing it in real life. But as for the other parts, that's where it kinda starts to become a problem. Like, money matches in the FGC is a staple. Like, when a player loses and becomes salty bombing out of pools at EVO, the next thing they do is to start challenging people in money matches at the casuals areas. But okay, they can just do that outside the venue. They can do money matches outside, they can basically gamble outside the venue all they want, and, you know, that's kind of the point of Salty Suite. But swearing? This is still the era where Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is still a main event game, and Pokechop and the ATL crew running around in Tekken doing the most funniest things during matches. Not only that, but the rivalry between K-Brad and Wolfchrome, like, that is what makes the FGC so hype, and Capcom making a stance pushing that out so that they could appeal to the esports crowd was not well received. And now the FGC today is sort of in the same scenario, with bigger and bigger companies or entities coming around and basically acquiring all the major fighting game tournaments and major fighting game companies. So yeah, Thuggery and this incident with Capcom was certainly something. If I were to have to rank this, I would put that as not great, but could be worse. The Thuggery controversy from Capcom, from my perspective, was where the whole divide of esports and FGC culture started to clash. I mean, this was also around the same time where Mike Ross just decided to bounce out and leave the public eye due to this same debacle. But that's enough talk for Street Fighter V. For now, let's move on to another major franchise from Capcom, a franchise that was once a titan, now nothing more than a shell of its former self. Here lies MVCI. It never had a chance, cause Capcom dropped the ball on this one. Also, more likely, the CEOs up at Marvel played a hand in its terrible launch, but we'll also get to that. So until somewhat recently, when Maximilian Dude decided to revive the game, MVCI was pretty much from the get-go on life support, and shortly after, buried in a shallow grave out back. MVCI had a lot of issues. Not necessarily gameplay related, but more so the optics surrounding the lead up to the game's release. The first thing was how much of a downgrade visually compared to Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I mean, it's been memed to death of how many times people compare the sleek, chiseled face of Dante in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 to the nightmarish ghoul he looked like in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite.
What? It's just an ordinary crabby. Oh my goodness! Capcom.
The other major issue was the lack of new characters and fan favorites missing from the roster of MVCI. I mean, you got Mega Man X, Jeddah, Ultron, and Gamora as the new characters, but the vast majority of the launch roster was returning from Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I mean, the launch roster was so badly received because out of the 30 available characters at launch, only 6 were new. On top of that, fans were asking why such fan-favorite staples from the X-Men series like Magneto or Wolverine were not in the game. Now, realistically, Capcom probably could not add them due to the X-Men being owned by Fox at the time, but the higher-ups also wanted Marvel to be promoted through this game, and specifically the Marvel Cinematic Universe like Guardians of the Galaxy or Ms. Marvel. But Capcom just can't outright say that and say, oh, it's because we were told by the Marvel execs to do these. So instead, they decided to do their PR stunt to try to mitigate the damage. One example was the director of production, Michael Evans, addressing questions about the X-Men not being in MVCI, stating, "You're a modern Marvel fan? Maybe they don't even remember some of the X-Men characters, but they know some of the Guardians of the Galaxy characters, or Black Panther, you know what I mean?" So yeah, that's a big yikes, but probably the most infamous and unfortunately one of the most beloved members of the FGC, Combo Fiend, had to be the fall guy, as he stated these infamous words.
And I'll read the first sentence of his reply, because it's good. And he says, "If you were to actually think about it, these characters are just functions." And just like that, a brand new meme was born. The PR nightmare continues.
Capcom did everything in their power, PR-wise, to make this game look like the worst fighting game on the market. It also did not help that around the time of its launch, another tag fighter with a beloved IP got announced in Dragon Ball FighterZ. It's just saying too, because the gameplay is great from what I hear, but man, Capcom did not give this a chance at launch. So, launch MVCI, I would have to put at, wow, that's pretty bad. Like, the game would need to take a lot of work to make it good, and the future was not looking so bright for MVCI. But hey, SF5 had a bad launch, maybe Capcom could get the train back on the tracks, and the best way to do it is through a competitive tournament circuit. Right, guys? Well, with every fighting game released by a major company, you have to have some sort of Pro Tour circuit. So Capcom had a Pro Tour circuit for MVCI, and it was called Battle for the Stones. Essentially, 16 players would be in a bracketed tournament similar to Capcom Cup, where each player would qualify in different ways. 7 players were auto-qualified, as Capcom gave these spots to the past 7 EVO champions in MVC3, so the other 9 spots had to be earned through online tournaments and premier events. The twist to this event was the premier events, called Infinity Stone tier events, not only gave the winner a spot in the finals, but also an Infinity Stone that gave them special abilities they could use once during any point in the bracket for Battle of the Stones. I have all of the stone abilities up on the screen, but some of them are just downright broken, like the Mind Stone allowing you to pick what character your opponent plays, or the Reality Stone which allows you to swap 3 button configurations on your opponent controller. Like, some of these stones basically gave you the ability to start the match 1-0. The stones though, they were at least a cool gimmick, but absolutely unbalanced. So despite the terrible launch of MVCI, Capcom must have done everything in their power to promote the game through this tournament circuit, right?
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man.
So yeah, the tournament circuit was badly handled. There was just no advertisement made for MVCI, and Capcom really didn't put that much effort into the circuit in the first place, because guess what? They had another important tournament circuit called Capcom Pro Tour for Street Fighter V they had to handle at the same time. So yeah, you can see which one had more priority here. Like, the attendance at these tournaments were so lackluster that one of these Infinity Stone tier events, you could go 0-2 and still make it to top 8. That's Nen impact levels of oof right there. But not only was the circuit overall borked by Capcom, but the finals were equally borked. Because guess what? Do you know when they decided to have the Battle for the Stones tournament? That's right, they had it at the same time as Capcom Cup. You're telling me Capcom decided it was a good idea to hold these two events together at the same time? And I mean, you had infamous photos like these showing around where pretty much it was an empty room when you were trying to watch Battle for the Stones. I mean, at least there was a good amount of people who were watching the grand finals, but leading up to it, yeah, it was essentially an empty ballroom. Capcom pretty much did everything in their power to make sure this game would be dead on arrival, and it's such a shame because players like Chris G, Cloud805, and Richard Wing dedicated so much of their time trying to get good at this game, only for it to be buried as deep as possible by the very same company that made it. The post-launch handling for MVCI and with the Battle for the Stones has to be ranked at, this is the absolute worst, because Capcom could have put the work in to make this game good like they did with Street Fighter V, but decided they didn't want to put any of the effort in. Now, almost a decade later, we can only look back at the good old days of when Marvel vs. Capcom was a premier tag fighter franchise. When COVID hit in the early 2020s, everything got shut down. This meant that there would be no in-person tournaments for fighting games for the foreseeable future, which means that the only avenue we got left to enjoy them were to use the online infrastructure for these games. And it seems like Capcom also thought the same thing as they moved the CPT over onto online. So yeah, people have been complaining for years for just how bad SF5 online is. I mean, one of the biggest fighting game creators, Sajam, made it clear how terrible the netcode was for Street Fighter V, and eventually got blacklisted from commentating at future Capcom Pro Tour events for a certain amount of time. What was even worse was Street Fighter V having rollback netcode, but it had bad rollback netcode. Yeah, the netcode was pretty bad that you would run into any kinds of issues in regional online tournaments where players might have to replay a match due to disconnects or terrible connection issues. It even led to some heated moments like Punk venting his frustrations at Alex Myers and Alex Valle due to the lag of Street Fighter V. Punk did eventually apologize, but still, high-level players had to deal with this frustrating environment of competing in unoptimal internet connections. I would have to rank this at not great, but could be worse. As much of the hype around fighting games were kind of in this purgatory, Capcom at least tried to do the best they could with the tools that they had. I mean, they did the showcase matches for the qualifiers who won in the regional tournaments and continually hosting these online regional tournaments as well. Despite the bad netcode that they certainly could have addressed, at least they tried their best to keep Street Fighter V alive during this time where in-person events were not available. Well, at least they resolved these online issues with Street Fighter 6, where it has one of the best online experiences ever in a Street Fighter game, but also probably just in fighting games in general. Like, we were able to have weekly online tournaments like TNS because of it. So, as we saw with the most recent content trailer for Street Fighter 6, people are not very happy with the lack of content thus far. After Capcom Cup 2025, Street Fighter 6 was definitely in a dry spell. There were no major balance updates despite the CPT season ending, and what was even weirder is the portion of the CPT at the start of 2025 was being played on the old balance patch. Capcom did eventually release a balance patch that had some major changes to perfect parry and Rotex, but besides Ryu, not much has been changed for the most part for the cast of Street Fighter 6. The lack of costumes for playable characters are also a big sticking point. Now, there are cosmetic contents in Street Fighter 6, but it's primarily for avatars and Battle Hub. Compared to Street Fighter V, where practically every character would have 6 or 7 costumes on average, or if you were Chun-Li, 100 on average. It was quite frustrating that Capcom was dedicating their time making these avatar costumes instead of costumes for the playable characters. Yeah, the lack of content in Street Fighter 6 is pretty frustrating, and if I were to rank this on the tier, it would probably be an not great, but could be worse. Like, I get it, the lack of content is really frustrating, and you want changes to happen in Street Fighter 6 because everyone wants them, and me included. But Street Fighter 6 as a whole is still a good product. I don't know when Capcom will address the lack of content in Street Fighter 6, but they will eventually address it, or at least I hope. So for now, I'm gonna just sit back, mash standing medium punch with Sagat until something new comes up. But hey, at least we can still look forward to one of the best events to come up for a Street Fighter fan when Capcom Cup comes around. Because man, I cannot wait to watch my favorite players duke it out and get to see who will be the next champion for 2026 and who'll get that $1 million. Capcom would have to do something crazy if they wanted to ruin the mood for people wanting to watch Capcom Cup. Well, all good things must come to an end, and unfortunately, they decided to make Capcom Cup pay-per-view. Literally, Capcom dropped the news that Capcom Cup 2026 will require you to pay to watch it online out of nowhere in a random tweet, catching everyone off guard. Now, there was some precursor to Capcom making this sort of decision. Let's not forget that earlier Capcom made it so that Street Fighter League Japan watch-along guidelines only allow you to stream the timer and nothing else. But pay-per-view Capcom Cup was several leagues higher on the bad decision chart for Capcom. Though there are some arguments as to why they need to do this, as finding a sustainable way to continue the longevity of Street Fighter 6's competitive lifespan, but like, there's better ways of doing it. Capcom and Street Fighter V, they made these costumes and stages specifically meant to help fund the CPT. So like, that's an easy avenue they could go for, and it would also resolve the other major issue with Street Fighter 6, which is the lack of content. But what's even worse about that is that the announcement where there was no consideration for other countries' currency conversions. So to me, if I were to rank this pay-per-view announcement, I would have to rank this as this is the absolute worst. Like, the big tournament everyone is trying to fight for a spot in and having a winner get $1 million has essentially been fizzled out and all the hype taken away due to this decision. On top of that, the potential for the new breakout players to come out of nowhere like Lashar did or Balaz, we'll never know and more than likely will not care that much. Well, at least it can't get any worse than this, right? So, okay, not necessarily a double down, but certainly more in the line of, we hear you, and we will communicate better in the future. Also, tickets are going to be on sale November 12th. I mean, this is pretty much a nail in the coffin that Capcom Cup will be pay-per-view, and it's probably going to be the case where it will be pay-per-view for the future of all Capcom Cups, unless if this really blows up in their face and financially it doesn't work out, but who knows. We were so close, man. Street Fighter 6 was going great, getting really popular in Japan and at least all over the world. Everyone enjoying how high quality it is, and then BAM! Pay-per-view Capcom Cup. Give them money now, or you can watch the VODs a week later, but at that point, who really cares about Capcom Cup a week later? So with that, the double down, I would also rank this in the same tier. This is the absolute worst, because we had hope that maybe they would back out of the pay-per-view decision and they would just go to the same model of allowing people to stream it and watch for free, but no, they didn't. And for the future of Capcom Cups, it's not looking too bright, and we might actually have to start forking up money to watch my throw loops or Bison throw loops. So this is pretty much my tier list for all of the major bad decisions Capcom has made with the FGC and fighting games overall, and yeah, their track record isn't quite the best. I'd probably missed a ton of stuff either during this time frame or even before the whole 2009 when Street Fighter 4 was released. So please tell me in the comments what are some major controversies Capcom has done with fighting games or with the FGC that you remember. But also, hey, Do you think that I was wrong in this tier list? Would you put some things higher or lower compared to the others? Tell me in the comments. But other than that, this has been the Yuckster. Thanks again for watching the video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.